Hello, my name is JGC. I'm putting together this brief presentation to summarize my series of 6 essays I wrote this summer of 2024 entitled Community Memory. It's going to be a brief discussion kind of on my framework for how to build resilient communities anchored in relationship instead of dependent on distant institutions, and how some new in the past decade collaborative technologies might be able to help with that. So where am I coming from? Who am I? I have a background in urban planning. I have a degree in urban planning, and in the course of my work in this field, it's full of great, creative, interesting people thinking about how to make our places better. It also occurred to me that this is similar to being an American. This is kind of the arrangement we have in general with most things, is that our places are a product and they are planned or created for us by a professional urban planner or professional developer. And our places are not defined by the people that live there, but rather the lack of participation, by the people who live there, and the degree to which these professionals can make a good product. And over the course of the past few years, I've come to believe that is not a resilient or sustainable way to build a society or to have places come to be. And it can make some good places that are a good experience or a good product, but it does not have or create the kind of local memory that can sustain those kinds of places for the long term. And so I want to encourage us all to think about better ways to put our places together, to make our places, and to make them more resilient. So the general this is just a little short summary of the series of essays, but um, it all rests on the idea that affectionate relationship is the bedrock of a healthy society. So if you don't have interpersonal relationship, you don't have affection for your neighbor or the place you live, um, you that place will not be better in a century from now. So healthy places maintain local agency and the ability to propagate their relationships and their memories through generations, in tandem with the local place, the local ecology. But when prosthetic institutions are substituted in place of this relationship, people disengage, and without the continuity of generational placemaking traditions, we detach from the consequences of our economies, we detach from our habits, and we leave our places to participate in um, boom and bust cycles that uh, depend on moving on instead of uh, maintenance and love and care over generations for those places. So there are relational technologies and tools that can help us shed the prosthesis of distant institutions and rebuild our competency and memory locally. And I think now is a great time to start using those tools. So another way to picture this is you have empathetic relationship to each other and our place. And if you have that, it produces a kind of magic balance of agency where you feel empowered and supported to make free decisions and improve the place you live, and you don't feel trapped, but you also live naturally people in empathetic relationship live within limits. They care for each other and they don't overuse their resources or take advantage of mm, future generations that can't speak for themselves. And so when you have that balance, it reinforces these empathetic relationships between people and their places. And this cycle through time can become a memory, a community memory, a habits of governance and care for a place that produce resilience. And so this cycle can occur through tradition and relationship primarily, but it is also supported by our tools. And in this case, can be supported by new tools for what I call community computing that we'll get into. Okay, so this comparison that I'm drawing here between empathetic relationship and distant centralized institutions can be understood in this following comparison of two approaches to water management. So we have the Aral Sea, which once was the fourth largest lake in the entire world and now is essentially doomed and all but dried up completely. And this was the product of some top-down engineering by the USSR, who thought uh, they were going to use this resource they had of fresh water to become a powerhouse in cotton, which they did, and they very efficiently grew cotton for a couple decades and did become a powerhouse. But now they have destroyed the natural resource that allowed them to do that. And so this is kind of the pattern of top-down, single direction, boom and bust use of resources that is a pattern in the world. And then we have um, traditional Nepalese water management that historically there were primitive but collectively managed dams that supported local agriculture. And these dams, even though they were have historically been made literally just out of mud and clay sometimes and sticks, um, ended up outperforming modern dams with flawless engineering. So this is the product of Eleanor Ostrom and her Nobel Prize winning research. She found that when the government got some grant money to pay some outside engineers to build a quote unquote perfect dam for a couple villages so that they could manage their water as they need to um, in Nepal. These dams required no outside maintenance and no relationship to the people at all. And so, mm, what was technically a more efficient and well built dam also required mm, no cooperation from users. And so what ended up happening was head end users extracted disproportionate share of the water, and um, no maintenance was necessary or collaboration was necessary from tail end users. So th- there was this adversarial relationship that was able to um, come of building something with no need for collaboration. So in the end, total crop yield is actually frequently higher for these primitive dams than the modern built dams. And so this is kind of the model that we're looking at moving forward for why empathetic relationship can outperform centralized institutions. So he will take another look at kind of the patterns in which a centralized institution has to operate. So this is a familiar example, probably to many people, but is the idea of the state needing, if you're an outside entity operating in 1,000 villages across the country, um, you don't have a relationship to that place, and so you need formalized organizational structures um, to provide you with data, and that data needs to be legible to anybody who's working to understand it. So this happened in Germany at the turn of the century. They introduced scientific forestry to manage timber yields. So historically, there were local modes of managing forests, and the state said, well, if we plant in rows and if we make them more harvestable, and if we make them easier to measure, then everyone's going to be happier. We're going to be growing more timber and we can tax it more efficiently. Um, and actually, this did for a time lead to higher timber yields, but in the end, it led to ecological imbalance of what we know monocropping does. Um, it it led to a decline in the ecology, and that ecological imbalance has yet to recover in Germany. So the the force of legibility from the state often has unforeseen consequences. So, and when the state forces local places into these boxes of legibility, you reinforce this relationship of expert and consumer, and people who have the best practices for how to arrange a society legibly become the experts. So this is the path of least resistance in American culture, is just to be a consumer of a place as a product. And so this dampens our sense of self-efficacy in placemaking, and it makes us distrust ourselves, and it enters us into this loop here of dependence on outside economic and institutional decision makers. And when we become or rely on outside experts, then we disengage ourselves from the problem. And then we lose this generational knowledge that allowed us to have the capability to make our own places and move our own towns forward. And with this lost generational knowledge, we're out of necessity dependent, even further dependent on these distant economies and institutional decision makers. And so over time, the you you no one is able locally to produce their place, and so you end up. This is just a simple example. You end up when Walmart moves in and people become dependent on their local Walmart, and smaller stores shut down, as happened across the country over the past century, then if the Walmart decides that it's no longer going to operate in your town, you have no Walmart, and you also have lost generational knowledge, lost um, all those other local retailers or business, local businesses. Um, and at some point, you don't have the ability to rebuild them, and so you simply have to drive further to some other Walmart or some other place that you are dependent on. And this is a shame because um, of the persistence of place. So even more strong than our uh, habits of governance and relationship, and more enduring, is the places that we live in. And these places embody our collective memory. So you can see the decisions that past generations made, even long after people forget why they made them or the people who made them are gone. Um, and so this is one thing when we're discussing what a community memory can be. It's important to remember that our memory is left in the physical infrastructure of our city, and so we have to be careful in the ways we change it, and we have an opportunity to change uh, future generations just by making our physical places a little better. So, in this discussion was this wonderful book called Palaces for the People by Eric Kleinenberg, and it discusses the idea of social infrastructure. So, this is physical infrastructure that embeds relationship into our lives, and this can be um, shaded streets or street vendors or a library in your neighborhood or parks. And all of these things make people happier and more trusting. And out of his research, he found safer in crisis. So the kind of the beginning of this formulation of his idea was um, a, heat wave in Chicago, and he studied the aftermath and what made people safe during this heat wave and what made the city more dangerous. And what he found was, accounting for all other factors, that the neighborhoods with better social infrastructure, and therefore neighbors who knew each other and were in the habit of relating to each other in public space, they were safer and they were checked on when somebody didn't see them. And so everyone in those neighborhoods stayed safer in crisis. And so um, we also can do the same, build social infrastructure um, to keep each other safe. And I think this is a better alternative than a lot of uh, quote unquote smart city vendors are selling to cities. Uh, you know, smart monitoring, and you can monitor the temperatures of every street in your city, and you can have video um, to surveil your citizens to make sure that they're safe. And uh, better than that alternative, an alternative to that, I think, is simply social infrastructure, ways uh, to relate to each other in public. Um, and so, healthy places maintain their local agency, and this is what allows them to propagate relationships over generations. Um, and we're going to now describe what this kind of relationally imparted agency looks like. It is spontaneous and it is a trust-filled relationship. And distant institutions are not very good at extending trust to local people. So, and that is because extending trust to each other and granting agency, it means giving up power. But to make a legible and measurable system, as we discussed earlier, you need control. And so today there are complex regulatory processes that manage how cities can be built. Um, and this is how institutions keep themselves safe, and they reduce um, responsibility in, in when you have very strongly controlled regulatory processes for community building. And so it's only accessible, making your place is only accessible to the well capitalized or connected today. And often, what is called community engagement in cities is just half hearted community meetings that to inform citizens of what the city or the developers are doing to their neighborhood, not a collaborative um, result of neighbors building for themselves. Um, but this kind of real engagement where people are capable and able to engage with the physical environment around them, um, only exists if the controlling institution is able and willing to give up power. So this um, discussion exists within the context of this continuum here that I have at the bottom of community engagement, um, the kind of community engagement I just described that is just informing citizens of changes. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have a protocol that is completely open and available, and people have the agency and ability to um, make changes to their city without permission of anything permission from anything other than the social process. So in sitting in between that is, I think, just something good um, to picture on this continuum because we're familiar with these with relating to platforms, and by a platform I mean the kind of thing that Amazon is, where it's not an online bookstore. It's not um, you know they don't take ownership. They don't buy every book before they sell it. And now, obviously, Amazon is something far beyond selling books. But they could have never done that if they didn't allow other people to sell products. They didn't become a platform for selling. And that is the same with YouTube. They don't produce the content. They allow people to put content in a controlled environment. The same is true for the Apple App Store. Um, that it is a somewhat open platform for people to do business and provide products to people. So the difference between this and an open protocol is censorship. So all of these companies still retain control and retain their power and can censor or make disappear anything that goes on YouTube or anything that goes on Amazon can be deleted. So um, working from this informing or creating the city as a product to um, the city as an outcome of people acting in their own neighborhood without the ability to be stopped, I think is the continuum that we should be thinking on. So I'll just dig into kind of, I guess, what the two descriptors I think that are two things that are true of places with agency. And the the first is dialogue. So this is in contrast to kind of the idea of the tragedy of the commons, which is justification for institutional intervention a lot of the times. So the tragedy of commons says, if an outside institution or force does not manage the rules and enforce the rules, then people will take advantage of each other. So and take and overuse resources. So what Eleanor Ostrom found is that this is true, that if there are no avenues for communication, as in the case of Nepalese dams that I gave earlier, then yes, people do indeed abuse their shared resources. But simply offering the possibility of face-to-face communication allows for greatly increased cooperation, and oftentimes this outperforms these professionally engineered rules systems, and are found to be more legitimate by the people participating in them. So a place with that produces and has agency has dialogue, and also it has spontaneity and informality. So we have these so vibrant communities are built on these informal, empathetic relationships that leave space for spontaneity. And spontaneity, leaving space for spontaneity, is inherently trusting because um, you don't know what's going to happen next. And so, this granting this space produces the kind of breakthrough thinking or accidental breakthroughs that in relationship that can solve hard problems. And this, I think, is reason why in a society too constrained by outside institutions isn't creative enough to solve problems reliably. Um, so in this is great example. I think shows that even small extensions of trust between our place and each other go a long way to build healthy relationships. Um, so the example is in Bryant Park in New York City. They, I think it was the 70s, they introduced these um, free to move chairs. And this is I guess the brainchild of William White, who wrote The Social Life of Small Urban Places. And so he made a lot of these videos where he would take videos of people in public spaces and observe and just learn from the way that people behave. So when you give people the opportunity to move their own chair, uh, you create this creative and open social space where people can move close to each other, face each other in the way that they want to, and there aren't these hard rules for how to behave in this place. And so detractors said, well, hey, that's fine, but people are going to steal the chairs, they're going to abuse them and break them, and it's not going to be worth it. But people didn't steal the chairs and they didn't break them, and there are still free to move chairs in Bryant Park in New York City today. And so this small extension of trust from the place to the people makes it a vibrant place. And this is the kind of trust that a rigid and distant institution can't extend. Um, and so if you take this notion of dialogue and spontaneity and try to picture how you might make an organizational structure that as an alternative to a distant um, institution, then I think these are the kinds of structures we could think about. So also kind of term coined by Eleanor Ostrom is the idea of polycentricity. So these are, you can see in this picture, there's no one central force controlling the system, but there also is not, it's not all small villages, for example, uh, with no other diversity in the type of organization. So instead, you have polycentricity. So you have maybe regional governments and state governments and local governments, and but the power emanates from the most local and works its way out. And um, this is the opposite, I guess, of the idea that the federal government says what can and can't go, and then local governments are left to fill in the gaps. So this idea of polycentricity and multiple centers of semi-autonomous decision making, this same and with each of these spheres being in relationship to each other, this concept actually mirrors biologist Michael Levin's description of how the body itself works and works to form the whole, which he calls multi-scale competency architecture, which is basically that each cell, even, and each body part um, is a center of local autonomous problem solving. And so these individual cells in your body work to solve problems, and then they form organs and regions, quote unquote, in your body that also work to solve their own set of problems, and collectively than we are a body. And so this is, I think, uh, it's fun. There's a fun parallel here, and I think that um, makes me excited that um, this polycentric organizational structure is a more healthy and resilient form of creating an organizational structure. So another term that we should be thinking about is called cosmolocalism, and this is basically a pattern that acknowledges that local agency and local resource management is more resilient, but also that we are exist in um, the context of a global uh, economy, and we have a access to the internet, and so we can leverage these tools as well. So, in if you picture like maybe like a local makerspace or 3D printing culture or CNC, which is machines that can cut to plan uh, certain types of wood. So, if you picture these kinds of cultures, they um, share plans freely and often share open source plans or from across the world, but the product itself is manufactured locally. And I think this is something we can adapt also to just the governance of our own homes and the physical things that we employ in our neighborhoods, whether it's um, you know a bus shelter or infrastructure for a bike lane or a playground. All of those things we can learn from other communities and we can adopt their designs, and this makes um, our our neighborhood more resilient. Um, and so now moving to thinking about limits. So without the continuity of these generational placemaking traditions, and in the context of places that are seen as products and managed by outside institutions, we detach from the consequences of our economies and we mortgage our futures to continue to maintain that trajectory of detachment. So, mm, one example, it's not just that we use resources from somewhere in South America, and we might not care about those consequences. But also, here's an example from the Central Valley in California, so a little closer to home for me at least. Um, this has, if you look in these photos, you can see that. Uh, so the Central Valley is where a huge portion of uh, the United States food is grown. In the last 100 years, um, farmers in that region have overdrawn the aquifer by a lot. Um, so almost all of this water goes to agriculture, and you can see in the photos that this has consequences for the ground. So the ground is literally sinking underneath them, and that is at the cost of providing fruits and vegetables to the country and the world. And so, but for the most of the people who consume that food, they have no attachment to the Central Valley, and they don't really care or have a way to care about um, the aquifer in the Central Valley, other than by price. So in general, these consequences accumulate out of sight. And so that's why my assertion is that any globalized economy tends toward decay of local places over time, um, because well, if you take the concept, it's called psychic numbing. So um, there are studies that show it's actually impossible for us to care about something beyond our immediate, our community and our the place we have relationships to and the things that we can see on a daily basis. It's impossible to care about those things beyond a certain degree. So since it is, we will continue to decay the places that aren't um, our home place. And if our places are products, and if we continue to move over the course of our lives, then there's no place that we take care of. And so over time, these the consequences of this behavior has accumulated to the broader existential weight of what people call the poly crisis of climate change and increasing cancer rates. And so the shape kind of again of these kinds of economies that rely on communities outside, um, is that you end up on this precarious trajectory that oftentimes you might be even able to see, but you say has historically been said, technological process will solve this problem for us. And it's not our job to think that far ahead. Um, it'll get figured out, or future growth will solve that problem. And because that has worked for us for the past several decades, um, people say that it will continue to be true. So, regardless of whether it is true, this style of placemaking indebts make us indebted to the future. Or another way to say it is, people in the future uh, are born into a debt for these um, trajectories of debt that we are putting them in today. Um, and so you have um, something like all the, there are forgotten malls and even neighborhoods that once were new across uh, all of America that now have been abandoned because it's economically inefficient to maintain or do anything with that land and that place. Um, and so it's better economically to abandon and move to a new place. And eventually, we run out of places, and people have this debt of this old mall or this parking lot and this soil that we haven't taken care of. And um, all of these things compound into a debt that eventually will need to be paid. And so these habits of that I just described kind of stand in contrast to limits that are derived in empathetic relationships. So um, instead of accumulating resources, natural systems build their health in the quality of the active and sustainable relationships that balance each other. So these nested and reciprocal cycles, such that exist in healthy forests, um, they, instead of with scale and complexity and over time, they build resilience. They don't build a debt. Um, and so these places and these kinds of relational economies supply each other with energy. And so you have this, instead of a high input and low output, one way consumption focused economy, you have this economy that requires very little energy input, because each of the flows of energy is matched. And so, as we said, over time, this these habits um, become easier to compare. Um, so, as natural systems mature, these relationships spread energy over these broad time horizons. So, when we were talking about polycentricity earlier, this is what you might call a temporal polycentricity. So, if you have this old forest that has exists kind of on these very many time hierarchies, um, from the scale of the pine needle, um, that changes over a year, or a, the crown that changes over several years, or um, one part of the forest that changes over decades, and then centuries for a broader part of the forest, and then the entire system over 1,000 years. Um, and that in the context of the entire region, um, which might change over a longer period of time. And each of these uh, parts are in relationship with each other. And so this is the kind of flows of energy that are necessary, to build a kind of memory, is when each of us is dependent and in relationship with previous generations and future generations, instead of consuming our places as a product. Um, so, kind of relating back to how distant institutions change places, um, and mold them into their shape, and thinking about um, the kind of place-based traditions that are produced out of relationship with a local ecology and local people. Um, we have this example of mezcal. So I'm not from Mexico, and I don't, um, you know, claim to have any special knowledge. But I have visited some of these villages, and I have seen the effects of this institutional imposition, and I think it's a great uh, example of kind of a thing to avoid. So, historically, mezcal or agave distillates are produced by families in very small batches for their village and their personal network. And that has produced the gusto historico, or the uh, very place specific taste of mezcal. So each mezcal is, um, you can taste the village by which it came, or you can sometimes even see the differences in which village made it, because in tandem with the agave that grows in that specific place, a culture of distilling that is often, it's not like a specific individual that has an individual style. Oftentimes, the habits of that village are um, established and drawn out over, the past century. And so, um, that's what traditional mezcal looks like. But the in the name of recently, in the name of protecting these traditions, the some federal institutions have stepped in to create a denomination of origin for mezcal, quote unquote, and to establish and protect um, this identity that these small villages have created. Instead, they often these people don't have the um, time or social capital or legal literacy to participate in these institutional demands for being certified as an official mezcal. And oftentimes, they're not interested. Um, so instead, the mezcals that have the easiest time being certified are those with industrialized, measurable processes and scales of production that make them more legible to a federal institution. And so you have this kind of subversion of um, the community memory by um, this distant institution that is claiming to protect this process. Okay, so if we have these distant institutions that are harming us in these very many ways that we've discussed, what can we do about it? And my assertion is that we can use new tools, more relational technologies to help us shed the prosthesis of distant institutions, and we can rebuild our local competency. So I discussed at the beginning that something that we must consider when we are making our places is the physical. We can't just rely on our relationships to each other, though there are the foundation of our places, and we can't just make a really great organizational system for governing. Um, we need to think carefully about the place that we exist in, and a healthy um, society will cherish its places. So another thing that is unavoidable, besides existing in physical space and having a very permanent physical space that we have co-created with all the generations around us, is the tools that we use to organize. So um, the tools that we use to organize will dictate the shape of our places and the shape of our relationships. And this is kind of um, the theory put forward by Conway's law, which describes the link between the communication structure of an organization. This is generally in software engineering, but I think that can be applied much more broadly. It describes the link between the communication structure of an organization and the system that it designs. And so, um, you can't have a centralized government produce a spontaneous and full of dialogue governance system. Um, and because of that, you need tools that your tools that you use to organize need to um, create trust, extend trust and spontaneity, um, and produce a local memory that can be stewarded. So one of the first and kind of inspiring um, thing in the history of technology is the beginning of the internet, actually. So these kind of the first iteration of the internet was called a bulletin board system, where people held physical terminals, mostly in their homes or in a public space, and their friends could use this computer to talk to other physical terminals that existed mostly regionally. So um, this is this strong connection to place that the internet began with. And actually, the first bulletin board system was called community memory, um, the namesake of this series of essays, um, because it, in their mind, held the memory of that community of people that existed in that physical space and that time, and was able to interact through these computers. Um, and so, yeah, our technologies mediate our memory and create our ability to remember. Um, and so, when we talk about these more relational ways of coordinating, like cooperatives, for example, they are traditionally more organizationally burdensome than uh, maybe being a consumer of place. And so this is our problem to solve. How do we collaboratively coordinate in ways that are sufficiently learnable and don't risk the introduction of more intermediaries to handle um, the tool? Um, so I do think that digital coordination can be fun and intuitive. Um, and we've already seen great examples of just like it's called open source ecology, a project to coordinate the easily replicable plans for farming equipment and other equipment to maintain a village and food supply for that village. And I think that's very admirable. And these low tech solutions for um, the replication of useful technology is where we should be aiming. So, another fun example is this, what I have a picture of here, fraud house. So this was just an example of someone posting a funny problem, which was there was a frog on their fence outside their house, and he said, "It looks like this frog needs somewhere to go." So he 3D printed a house, and just the introduction of a fun and worthy problem. It induced a lot of collaborative effort from quote unquote the internet, where people introduced new ideas for how to improve the house or new designs and offered to work together collaboratively um, to make a better frog house, 3D printed frog house. And now these designs are sold. Um, and so this is an example of simply having, like a low hanging easy way to collaborate to just TikTok comments, and a willing collaborator is sometimes all you need. And so um, this series of essays kind of works towards why cryptocurrencies and crypto is a good fit for making these kind of more collaborative, relational, and empathetic tools. Um, so obviously, Bitcoin was a thrust towards a new kind of money that is sovereign and outside of state control. So that is the direction things have been heading since the beginning, outside the control of large institutions. And then I guess a funny example is Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, which is the second most well-known cryptocurrency today. He made this kind of what is called this world computer of Ethereum. Um, he jokes that the impetus for that is that he played World of Warcraft, and one day the people who made that video game removed this one component of uh, this one item in his game, and that convinced them. He knew they didn't have to ask his permission, and they didn't ask anyone's permission. That's an example of I guess, like a platform on this um, in informing to protocol scale that we discussed earlier. This is a platform that had full control over his game, and he realized that these centralized services um, can censor or change the rules of the game, and that changes kind of the experience of agency for that person, and it's a product. It's not a community of people who are making something long lasting and resilient. And so that idea is at the center of why people are making um, crypto tools, is having this digital sovereignty and resilience. Um, and also, because of that, people are in the habit of building tools that allow direct ownership and empowered participation. And they're in the habit of making tools that are composable, meaning that they exist in an open ecosystem where tools can be layered, and identity and money and ownership structures naturally interoperate. Um, so this collaborative culture that exists in crypto is a good place to establish this relational and collaborative kind of mode of creating a community memory that we're discussing. But this is uh, crypto, quote unquote, is not just one group of people. It's not people all with the same opinion, of course. And so um, I think this actually lends some strength to the idea that this set of tools is ideal for creating a polycentric um, organizational structure for society, is that you have tools like Ethereum, which are designed to function as this permanent source of universal truth, um, this shared world computer that has shared infrastructure for the entire world and can provide a universal money and can be immutable and uncensorable. Um, so this rigid uh, system, I think, also exists within the culture of crypto, is are people building things like Cosmos, which is a um, blockchain is not designed to be a permanent source of universal truth. Um, it's designed for each community to make their own blockchain that serves as their own local source of truth, where they can collaborate more um, with more flexibility and openness, and make their social system more closely reflect their local place. So both of these things lend towards the cultural polycentricity of crypto, and I think pairs well with the kind of um, polycentricity necessary to build independent and local um, systems of governance that can interoperate with each other. Um, and so now we're going to just move into some simple examples, I think, of the ways these technologies can be used today. And most of these examples aren't, um, I don't think that I think that we people get lost in these economic games when they're creating crypto tokenomics and trying to make a meme coin that also has some good social use. I think all of those experiments, as I said, are good, but I think the lowest hanging fruit is all these concepts in localism and cooperatives that have existed for decades, but maybe need a place where they can interoperate, or a permanent infrastructure that doesn't require um, each local place to remake their infrastructure for their local money, but it can be forked or reused. Other people's ideas can be reused, and so I think the most foundational, specific thing in the world of crypto that will be useful is this idea of a digital identity. So in Ethereum, you can get an Ethereum address. Anyone can have as many as they want. And this is like the kind of the basic um, unit of identity in Ethereum. Um, and so people on Ethereum and states themselves have been talking a long time about a universal identity system or a nationwide digital ID, and then people discuss alternatives as self-sovereign identity systems, and I do think each of those things is interesting, but the easiest and lowest hanging fruit is just a local um, reputation systems. This is how identity has historically been constructed, mostly in relationship with the people around you. That's how you create an identity, and so you can do this on chain with blockchains. You can take several markers, informal markers of identity, maybe your username, your ENS name that you use on Ethereum, which digital collectibles you own, and proof of attendance at different events that were handed out at the time. And each of these things can exist within your Ethereum address, but can collectively kind of accumulate to show who you are. So there are people working on this, like Gitcoin Passport and Lens, and I think these kind of reputation systems will be important for all of some of the following innovations that we talk about, like um, voting systems, where you have lots of creative uh, innovation in the world of voting. Just the tradition of liquid democracy and delegation that's active in almost any crypto organization today. You have people experimenting with conviction voting, which is, you might have a voting period that begins and the voting is continuous, but people who have, uh, you can change you can change your vote, but over time, if you've not changed it, that vote grows stronger in weight. Um, and these are just all small experiments that we can run if we are able to, if only a little bit, begin to trust what is happening on a blockchain, and if cities begin to experiment um, a little bit, and if communities begin to experiment to see how they can move some of this behavior, some of their governance on chain, then we might begin to blur the lines between what uh, is official governance and what is the governance of a local nonprofit, or what is the governance of a local neighborhood group. If those things can happen in a place that is trusted to be real, um, and then you get these blurred lines, just like we have between traditional media institutions and now individuals who are YouTubers. Um, so then maybe we even get this GitHub style pull request. I have a planning document, or the city code. I have a comment or some sort of change that I think should be made. I make this request. People can vote on the change, and then it could go. It can be voted into existence, and that can be done all using these more permanent and more trustworthy systems rather than um, maybe just you have the code printed out and then scanned in by someone to uh, in the city, or you just have a picture of the code online, or you have to go through a city planner to really understand what the code, the city, some of the rules in the city are. Um, if you have this more digitally malleable governance, then you start to see local groups take a little more responsibility if they're given more trust in handling, how a planning document comes to be, maybe. And along these same lines, we have participatory budgeting, which is well loved, but historically difficult to administer. This is basically people directly uh, choosing what to do with the city budget, or directly choosing what the city budget will look like, at least part of it. And so there's long tradition, not long, but there is a tradition of doing this in New York City, but it is, and other places, but is historically difficult to administer. It requires a lot of resources from the government. And in contrast, today, some of the most important organizations in crypto, all of their finances are voted on and managed directly on chain, and where all of these finances are going is completely transparent. And so we have the possibility uh, to vote on and move money on chain today. And so I think there's room for cities to experiment uh, with participatory budgeting. So, and beyond kind of municipal governance, um, there's also just new opportunities for crowdfunding in general. So, we kind of have the past 20 years have a revolution in crowdfunding that is enabled by the internet. Um, and this both reveals the strong desire to participate in these systems, but also a strong need for alternative forms of funding, um, uh, rather than a local bank who might not want to fund or have the appetite to fund a local farm. And so there are opportunities for more relational economies. People can, um, of course, you can always do this today. Um, you can People run CSA, community supported agriculture, where you prepay for your groceries for the year or the season to a farmer so that they can. This is essentially a loan to continue their operations, and maybe they get the money in a lower season, and that benefits them. You people do that today for sure, but the um, a forkable system, or a um, system of accounting that is transparent and can manage some of these things for the farmer, or in general, there's the idea of use credit obligations. So this is like a generalized form of community supported agriculture. So you might have a bakery that wants to open a brick and mortar, but doesn't have enough money to move in and build out the space. So um, they sell $10 worth of bread today for $9, and suddenly they have the money um, by selling their future work as a used credit obligation. They have the money to build out their new storefront. Um, and these kinds of things, as I mentioned, can be done, but are um, administratively burdensome. And so um, we can build out systems, cosmolocal, shareable, forkable systems for um, financializing these kinds of real, local empathetic relationships. Not financializing, but simplifying these kinds of empathetic relationships, and that can help these organizations. So today we have a lot of tools that can do these kinds of things. We have Juicebox um, and Gitcoin grants um, that allow for crowdfunding today. So this infrastructure is already in place and it's usable by local people. And I'm excited to see people start experimenting. So the again, these are simple ideas, but across the United States, there's tons of city-owned land banks with that cities are sitting on unused local land that basically is just a problem in governance. They don't know what to do with it or have a use. But if we can connect the management of this land with willing local people who are excited to engage and can be given ownership, um, partial ownership, and the ability to manage what is done with this local vacant land. I think people can be empowered to make better use of these city-owned land banks. And similarly, community land trusts, or uh, maybe the city can give local city land or lease it to community organizations um, to build affordable housing in the style of a community land trust um, on top of city-owned land. And this agreement and arrangement can be done on a blockchain, and it is already possible to do through many of these blockchain-based tools, like a party protocol is a tool for collectively managing ownership of assets. Um, you could put a community land trust on party protocol today. Um, and so we just need to make these small steps to create the first patterns, and then the patterns can spread. Um, so similarly, there are these burgeoning commons or communities of people managing 3D printing designs or CNCs or resource libraries. This photo is it's called Wikiblock, um, that has open source designs for people to use their own local CNC machines and wood panels to design. Here we have like a little parklet, or design bike lane infrastructure, or design benches or bus benches. Um, we have this organization that is willing to become a resource library, um, but it's difficult to administer, and this program, and to be in touch with anyone who might want to use the designs. And if you can put some of the infrastructure for payment or the managing of these resources on blockchain infrastructure, it could be useful um, to anyone interested in improving their city. And then these kinds of designs can also be made available to some cities are already making available some set of 5 or 6 designs for affordable housing that are approved under very many circumstances, and so it's easier to get past some of the uh, get over some of the development hurdles. This kind of thing could be managed on chain, and so cities could share these resources with each other um, on Ethereum, for example, in an infrastructure that doesn't require a lot of resources to make transferable. So, of course, the last thing I want to get into is um, the idea of money. So, the shape of our economies, as we've discussed, dictates a lot of the institutional and social form and physical form of our communities. And so, we shouldn't ignore the first kind of use case for cryptocurrency, and that is of money. As an alternative to kind of state currencies, there are a lot of experiments in the space in universal money, which I think is, again, in the spirit of polycentricity. I think this is a good thing. There's Bitcoin and Ethereum um, that, both call themselves money. But there's also things like DAI, which is a um, quote unquote um, stable coin pegged to the US dollar, soft pegged to the US dollar, that employs a scheme basically to always be worth $1. Then there's RAI, which claims no peg at all to the US dollar, but has other mechanisms for being more stable than Bitcoin and Ethereum. And then there's um, things that might be more understandable to the traditional world of finance, like um, local banks are the ones that traditionally do most of the actual money creation in our system. So there's a consortium of banks that is calling themselves USDF that is proposing to make a stable coin that is backed by by deposits in their member banks. And so all of these things are, there's much talk about central bank digital currencies, and I'm sure there will be many experiments by states themselves in money. But all of these things are, I think, more resilient alternatives to a state currency, but are universal money. But I think the most interesting use, probably, that we've discussed at all um, of blockchain technologies is for local money. Um, so um, for for all of the reasons we've discussed, a local monetary system is more resilient. It better matches local relationships. It's less beholden to political um, the political will of the state, um, which can be a good thing, or could not be. Um, and so I think having some alternatives to, especially in times of crisis, for people to manage their own economies locally without input from some larger system, I think that's a good thing. So a very simple example of a local money, kind of local money that I'm excited about. It's called obligation clearing. So it's very simple. You just take a map of, maybe like the one you see over here, of a map of economic relationships that um, you might have. You picture like a, maybe not with your friends, but commercial entities in your region, in your city, that have that invoice each other. So you have an economic map of, or you have economic relationships mapped, and account balances that settle at the end of a term. Like, let's say they settle monthly, they clear, everybody's debt is cleared. But instead of paying your monthly invoice to your uh, the farm that provides you with chicken, and a different monthly invoice to um, the one that provides utensils for your restaurant, and another one to the one that provides you with tables, uh, and then also paying each individual employee on a biweekly basis that requires a lot of cash for that business. But instead, if you wait till the end of the month, and instead of each party paying an invoice, um, you have a system that maps the economic relationships and only requires the amount of cash in net that each party is owes to the entire network. And so this, yeah, this is called obligation clearing, and it doesn't require um, any real change in behavior, and is already exciting in and of itself because it can reduce the internal debt, or like the need for cash, by 25%. But then if you take that system and then you introduce the idea of mutual credit, which is where participants might extend each other credit, or they say, we clear uh, payments monthly, but I will um, extend some sort of credit, or I am okay with not being fully paid back up to 3 months out. Well, then that kind of mutual credit system that doesn't require any uh, banks, or um, you know anybody besides the people involved in that economic system to participate. It doesn't require uh, it requires 50% less cash. So in times of crisis, you can have a more local economy. Um, and so historically, these kinds of mutual credit systems have still needed a trusted central operator to clear the credit, to be the basket in the middle that everyone gives their money to. They map the relationships and they make the payments. Um, But now this kind of system can be managed by a smart contract on a blockchain transparently. And that smart contract can be managed through on-chain governance. So I think this is a huge opportunity, and it's being taken by some people. There's a Seraphim network run by Grassroots Economics, and they're operating um, these systems of obligation credit offset and mutual credit have a history in Africa, and they're working in Kenya and other parts of Africa to apply this highly localized credit offset system. And then another group I'm very excited about, run by Ethan Buckman, who was co-founder of Cosmos, is called Cycles. And they're also working on-chain blockchain infrastructure to support mutual credit systems like this. This is a really exciting opportunity. I think we should keep an eye on, and local places should begin using as soon as they can. So, in general, how do we build a community memory as an alternative to a distant and risk-inducing, distant. How do we build an alternative to these distant institutions? Um, my personal opinion is that w- they need to be parallel systems. We can't fight the institutions from the inside. They're built to move slower than we're capable of. And it's also not by abandoning our communities and our places that we live in today to go move to some blank slate place where we can redesign the governance, but we have no connection to the city or to the place at all, to the ecology, and we have no history. Um, I think that is also a recipe for failure. So I think that the answer is we build a long-term commitment to each other and our places, and we engage with new tools and new technologies to build this memory and this tradition of relating to each other. Um, then I think we can make resilient places that are outperform distant institutions. So then the last thing I want to mention is you can click on this link here, but or type it in. Um, but I made in tandem with these essays, I made a series of mementos on the Ethereum blockchain, um, and it, the basic idea. I'd love for you to visit or talk to me about them more. The basic idea is that it mapped the relationships between there's a group of people who were able to collect this memento, 30 people, and then each of those 30 people who felt some affinity for the project um, were able to put on a list three additional people that they would like to have this memento. And then those people could also collect the memento after only being on the list, after this initial 30. They had to be added to the list. So what we ended up with here in the top right is a map of these relationships of people who are interested in these ideas. And through time, as this map matured and people referred their friends and the relationships were mapped, people had the chance to take kind of like a screenshot of that, the community at that moment in time. And so as the map grew, the site here, memento.memory.community, it took basically takes note of the history. It took a memory uh, of each shape of the community. And so today there are 21 snapshots of what the map looked like. And the fun part is that each time community member refreshes the page, the map looks different because it's moving, it's living, and each person's perspective is unique. But when they commit that shape of the community to memory, they that shape is permanent in the kind of community archive, the community memory. Um, and so in together, people kind of created this story of how the um, community grew over time as it moved towards being quote unquote sold out. So there are 150 um, total mementos that have been collected. There are actually a few more that I have control of. If you're interested, I'd love to give you one. You will show up on the map. Um, but this series of mementos created a song. So as each snapshot was taken on the website, you can scroll through, and the song starts out sparse as the map is sparse, and then as it fills in and as the community matured, um, it kind of instruments and sounds and ideas are matured, and you can hear that. So it's kind of like the artistic representation of some of these ideas, and I wanted to share them here with you. Um, and that's that's the end. That's you have probably now a better understanding of this series of essays. And I'm very happy that you took the time to listen through them. Please um, message me on Twitter or find me somewhere on the internet. My personal website is jgc.fyi. Um, I would love to talk to you more about these ideas. Thank you.